The ancient Celtic world, a vast, mysterious domain spanning Britain and Gaul, was a land of primal magic, deep forests, and absolute religious authority wielded by the Druids. That is the romanticized image of warrior kings and sacred groves. The terrifying truth, recorded by Roman chroniclers like Julius Caesar, is that the Celtic priesthood maintained their dominion through systematic, breathtaking acts of mass human sacrifice. Their most infamous creation was the Wicker Man, a colossal, terrifying effigy of woven branches and wood. This Wicker Man was not a symbol. It was a terrifying, enormous wooden cage used to simultaneously burn dozens, sometimes hundreds, of human victims alive. The Druids believed this ritual was necessary to appease their fierce gods and ensure the fertility and survival of the land. The greatest secret of the Celtic world is that their spiritual leaders presided over mass murder rituals on a scale that rivaled the bloodiest acts of the Roman Empire. Don't you dare look away! Watch this entire deep-dive documentary and subscribe to Crown of Dread, and you will learn the one shocking fact about the Wicker Man that proves the Druids filled the structure not just with criminals, but with innocent people. The terror began not with the flames, but with the terrifying absolute power the Druids held over every aspect of Celtic life. The Druids were more than just priests. They were the judges, the scholars, and the absolute political authority that stood above the warrior kings of the Celtic tribes. Their word was considered divine law, and their influence was enforced by a chilling threat. The ultimate weapon of the Druids was excommunication, ostracism. If a Druid declared a nobleman or a warrior an outcast, that person was instantly shunned by the entire society. They could not participate in rituals, trade, or even be spoken to by their own family. This social death was often a slower, more terrifying end than any execution. This system of spiritual tyranny allowed the Druids to maintain complete control over the constantly warring tribes. They alone could declare war or enforce peace, and they alone could demand the ultimate price: human sacrifice. The kings and warriors submitted because they knew their political power depended entirely on the Druids' spiritual sanction. This demonstrates the historical reality of tyranny by religious authority. The Druids showed that complete control over the narrative of the divine provides a ruler with absolute power, proving that the threat of spiritual isolation is a powerful tool of social control in any community. But the most shocking secret of the Wicker Man was the sheer diversity of its human cargo, a mix of victims that defies simple historical labels. The Roman accounts suggest that the Druids initially preferred to sacrifice criminals, thieves, brigands, and political enemies, believing that the gods were best pleased by the death of the wicked. But the terrifying truth is that the supply of criminals often ran low. When criminals were unavailable, the Druids resorted to sacrificing innocent individuals, slaves, foreigners, or even members of the common populace to fill the massive Wicker Man structure. The ritual demanded a specific quantity of human life, not a specific moral quality. The sanctity of the ritual transcended the concept of justice. The Druids also employed ritualistic forms of mutilation and prophecy. Victims were sometimes subjected to terrifying rituals, where their last spasms or the flow of their blood were read by the Druids to divine the future. This combined the horror of torture with the terror of prophecy. This situation illustrates the chilling historical principle of institutionalized scapegoating. The Druids showed that when a totalitarian religious system requires continuous sacrifice, the safety of the populace is completely irrelevant, proving that religious demands can be a cover for random, arbitrary murder. But the most agonizing form of execution was not the fire itself, but the bizarre ritual used by the Druids to prevent the victims from screaming. The Druids' Wicker Man ritual was a terrifying public spectacle, but they required silence from the victims, A ritual of this magnitude demanded a dignified, silent submission to the will of the gods. Historical accounts suggest that the Druids, before lighting the massive effigy, sometimes performed ritualistic forms of mutilation or sedation on the victims to prevent their terrifying screams from disrupting the ceremony. This could involve forcibly removing their tongues or administering a powerful herbal narcotic to induce a state of stupor before the flames began. The victim, already trapped inside the claustrophobic wicker structure, was subjected to a final, horrifying denial of their humanity. The denial of their voice. The spectacle of the burning Wicker Man was a silent, terrifying testament to the absolute control the Druids held over the body and mind of their subjects. This demonstrates the historical truth that tyrants fear the voices of their victims. The Druids showed that controlling the narrative of suffering, silencing dissent, is a crucial step in normalizing atrocity, a tactic used by modern dictators to suppress protests. But the ultimate insult to the victims was the horrifying final act of the Wicker Man, a mass burning ritual that also served a cynical political purpose. The mass sacrifice was often conducted to ensure the fertility of the land and the success of the harvest. The Druids taught that the gods demanded human life in exchange for prosperity. But the Wicker Man also served a terrifying, practical political purpose. The mass burning of criminals, dissenters, and foreign captives served as an ultimate display of state power and unity. By forcing all the warring Celtic tribes to participate in or witness the terrifying ritual, the Druids reinforced the idea that they were a single, unified people under the spiritual authority of the priesthood. The spectacle of the burning effigy was an act of political coercion. It warned any potential dissenter, both foreign and domestic, that resistance to the Druids' rule would result in annihilation by fire. The ritual maintained order not just through faith, but through spectacular, absolute terror. This demonstrates the historical use of mass execution as nation-building. The Druids showed that spectacular violence can be utilized to forge a cohesive national identity and enforce absolute political obedience, a tactic used by ancient and modern empires alike. We have traced the terrifying ritual of the Wicker Man, but the darkest secret remains: the truth about the final act of the Wicker Man, a horrifying ritual tied to the victim's blood. The Druids maintained their absolute authority not just through execution, but through terrifying religious prophecy. They claimed the ability to read the will of the gods in the most gruesome ways imaginable, often involving human remains. According to Roman accounts, the Druids practiced a horrifying form of augury, divination, where they would stab human victims in the abdominal area and then read the victim's dying spasms, twitching limbs, and the flow of the blood to predict the future, interpret the will of the gods, or determine the outcome of a war. This ritual combined psychological terror with grotesque mutilation, ensuring that the victims died in prolonged agony, their final moments used as a tool of political and military planning. The Druids alone held the key to this terrifying spiritual intelligence. This practice demonstrates the historical danger of weaponizing esoteric knowledge. The Druids showed that by controlling access to the divine truth through gruesome rituals, the ruling religious class can enforce absolute obedience and silence among both the populace and the kings. But the most shocking secret about the Wicker Man was the bizarre, specific criteria the Druids used to choose the body shape of the victims. The mass sacrifice within the Wicker Man was governed by a terrifying, complex hierarchy. The Druids believed that different gods required different types of human offerings, often aligning them with the four classical elements: fire, water, earth, and air. Victims were reportedly allocated to specific sections of the enormous Wicker Man structure based on the method of their intended final death or the god they were meant to appease. For example, victims destined for the fire god might be those who were considered criminals, the lowest value, while victims destined for the water god might be those who were ritualistically drowned or partially suffocated before being placed inside. Furthermore, the Druids demanded that the structure contain a mix of different types of victims, slaves, criminals, and sometimes unfortunate free men, ensuring the ritual satisfied the full spectrum of their demanding pantheon. The ritual was meticulously designed to cover all spiritual bases. This illustrates the terrifying historical precedent of bureaucratic cruelty. The Druids showed that by systematizing murder and classifying victims into cold, abstract categories like elements, the ruling class can detach itself from the moral implications of their atrocities. But the true cost of the Wicker Man was the secret, agonizing ordeal endured by the survivors of the ritual. Not all victims captured for the Wicker Man were immediately sacrificed. Some, particularly slaves or foreign captives, were held in terrifying uncertainty, often enduring months of ritualistic psychological torment before their final fate was decided. Survivors of the Druids' capture, who were eventually released or exchanged, were often ritually branded or scarred by the Druids, marking them forever as having been offered to the gods. This scarring was a permanent, terrifying reminder of their proximity to the sacred fire. These survivors were socially ruined. They were viewed as unclean or cursed by their own people, and their testimonies, if they dared to speak, were often discounted as the ravings of the tormented. The Wicker Man's psychological terror was so immense that it continued to destroy the lives of those who escaped the flames. This situation demonstrates the historical horror of psychological trauma as a political tool. The Druids showed that the memory of terror and the shame of survival are often more potent than physical violence in ensuring long-term social and political control. But the most effective way the Druids maintained their absolute authority was a terrifying ritual performed on the kings themselves. The Celtic kings and chieftains were powerful warriors, but their temporal power was always subordinate to the spiritual authority of the Druids. This relationship was reinforced by a terrifying, specific ritual of submission. To assume or maintain power, a Celtic king was often required to participate in a humiliating ritual of obedience. This could involve the king publicly kneeling before the chief Druid, confessing his sins, or sometimes undergoing a ritualistic act of symbolic mutilation, such as a deep cutting of his hand, to prove his physical submission to the priesthood. This ritual was necessary to show the populace that the king's power was only valid under the Druids' divine sanction. The kings endured this humiliation because they knew that without the Druids' backing, their reign would immediately collapse under the weight of spiritual illegitimacy. This demonstrates the ultimate historical hierarchy of spiritual over secular power. The Celtic system showed that controlling the religious narrative is the most effective way to subjugate even the most powerful political leaders, a dynamic still present in some modern theocracies. But the darkest secret of the Wicker Man remains: a bizarre medical procedure performed on the victims to maximize their terror. The Druids were not just religious leaders. They were masters of primitive pharmacology and herbal medicine. They used this knowledge not just for healing, but to enhance the terror of their rituals. Accounts suggest that prior to being placed inside the Wicker Man, victims were sometimes subjected to the administration of powerful, mind-altering herbal extracts, natural psychedelics, that heightened their sensory perception. The goal was to maximize the psychological terror of the victim before the flames began, ensuring their fear resonated throughout the ritual. The victim, already experiencing intense psychological breakdown, would then face the massive structure with their senses amplified, making the final moments of immolation an unimaginable psychological and physical agony. This horrifying practice illustrates the historical use of pharmacology as a tool of political terror. The Druids showed that controlling the victim's sensory experience can be a deliberate, terrifying way to enhance the effectiveness of public cruelty and political spectacle. We have traced the terrifying rituals of the Wicker Man, but the ultimate, darkest secret is the final act of the burning effigy, a horrifying ritual tied to the victim's blood. While the Wicker Man often claimed the lives of criminals and slaves, the most politically resonant sacrifices were those taken from the Celtic aristocracy or the wealthy merchant classes. According to Roman sources, the Druids occasionally demanded the sacrifice of high-ranking noblemen or even members of the king's own family. This demand was not arbitrary. It was a terrifying display of spiritual supremacy over political power. By forcing the king to surrender his own kin, the Druids reinforced their position as the final, untouchable authority in the land. This practice ensured that the entire social structure, from the lowest slave to the highest king, lived in perpetual, absolute fear of the Druids' pronouncements. The political elite understood that their wealth and military strength meant nothing when the Druids spoke on behalf of the gods. This situation illustrates the chilling historical concept of ritualized leveling. The Druids showed that by making sacrifice a universal possibility, even for the elite, they could prevent the nobility from ever challenging the religious and political monopoly of the priesthood. But the most disturbing detail of the Wicker Man was the bizarre combination of sacrificial victims, a dark, symbolic offering to satisfy every element of the gods. The Wicker Man was not filled with a random selection of victims. The Druids orchestrated a precise cocktail of human offerings designed to satisfy every possible divine need, proving their meticulous attention to ritual detail. The structure was often filled with individuals chosen to fulfill specific, symbolic roles. The quick-witted were sacrificed for the gods of knowledge, the strongest warriors for the gods of war, and, chillingly, the physically disabled or deformed were sometimes chosen to be sacrificed to appease gods associated with plague and misfortune. This ritual of comprehensive sacrifice ensured that no matter the problem facing the Celtic tribes, be it plague, drought, or military failure, the Druids could claim they had provided the precise, necessary human tribute. This complexity was essential to maintain the priesthood's legitimacy. This demonstrates the historical horror of tyranny rooted in categorization. The Druids showed that by assigning abstract religious value to different types of human life, they could justify systematic, ritualistic murder based on physical characteristics or perceived social utility. But the ultimate insult to the sacrificed victims was the horrifying final destination of their ashes. The final act of the Wicker Man ritual was perhaps the most disturbing, extending the exploitation of the victims' bodies beyond the flames. The Druids believed that the victim's final essence was necessary for the fertility of the land. Following the complete immolation of the Wicker Man structure, the ashes and charred human remains were often meticulously gathered by the Druids. These remains were then ritually scattered or mixed directly into the fields before planting, transforming the victims into a grotesque final offering to the Earth Mother, Tyrannus, or Pachamama equivalents. This terrifying ritual ensured that the victims, even in death, were denied a proper burial. They were reduced to fertilizer, their physical essence integrated back into the land they were meant to sustain. This was the ultimate cold-blooded final act of the Druids' religious dominion. This illustrates the terrifying historical fusion of agriculture and atrocity. The Druids showed that when a culture believes human life is interchangeable with natural resources, systematic cruelty can be integrated into the most basic aspects of survival, leading to a profound corruption of ethics. But the true source of the Druids' collapse was the terrifying military response of the one man who refused to tolerate their power. The terrifying power of the Druids eventually met its absolute counterforce in Julius Caesar and the Roman legions. Caesar, the ultimate rationalist and military strategist, viewed the Druids' power as a direct, unacceptable threat to Roman governance and imperial control. Caesar launched a systematic, brutal campaign to annihilate the Druid priesthood in Gaul. He ordered the destruction of their sacred groves, the burning of their schools, and the execution of the priests. Caesar deliberately targeted the Druids because he understood that their spiritual authority was the source of Celtic resistance. By eliminating the priesthood, Caesar effectively decapitated the Celtic political structure, proving that even the most formidable religious tyranny can be shattered by superior military and administrative power. The Wicker Man and its terrifying power were extinguished by Roman fire and efficiency. This demonstrates the ultimate historical conflict between ideology and empire. Caesar showed that a state aiming for absolute secular power must ruthlessly eliminate any rival authority, be it religious or political, proving that power struggles are often battles for the control of fundamental beliefs. We have traced the terrifying rituals of the Wicker Man and its final destruction. Now, for the final critical verdict, we must confront the ultimate moral cost of the Druids' power. We have unsealed the terrifying secrets of the ancient Celts, the systematic mass execution in the Wicker Man, the ritual mutilation used for prophecy, the psychological torture of the victims, and the final brutal scattering of human ashes for fertility. The Druids' power was absolute, rooted in a terrifying contract with their gods that demanded human life in exchange for prosperity. Their crown of dread was woven of wicker and paid for by the flames. We have revealed the entire horrifying truth. But now, we turn the final question to you, the crown of dread audience. The Druids used mass human sacrifice, the Wicker Man, as a tool of political and religious control to enforce unity among the warring Celtic tribes. Do you believe that this systemic atrocity, which enforced stability across a massive territory, was a necessary act of state consolidation, or was it the ultimate unforgivable crime of religious tyranny? Let the world know your verdict. Drop your opinion in the comments below. Subscribe to Crown of Dread for more hidden history, and find the truth buried beneath the oldest thrones.